Hello and welcome back to followers of the Kaspa journey. Now, today's video, we are going to be responding to a video by Matthew Cratter of Bitcoin University called "Is Kaspa the Next Bitcoin?" In this video, Matt essentially argues against Kaspa and points out various reasons why Kaspa is not the next Bitcoin, and I wanted to discuss and refute some of the points that he makes in this video. I actually invited Matt onto the channel to discuss with me and debate publicly, and Matt mentioned that he does not do public debates or public appearances, so instead we are going to be settling to responding to the points in his video. So we're going to be watching his video and responding point by point. So let's get right into it.
This is Matthew Cratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to answer the question, is Kaspa the next Bitcoin? In this video, I'm going to give you the methodology you can use, not just to analyze Kaspa, but to analyze any new cryptocurrency that you might have questions about. So I'd encourage you to watch this video, even if you're not especially interested in Kaspa. Now, Kaspa is currently ranked number 24 among cryptocurrencies by market cap. It's currently sandwiched between ICP, Internet Computer, and Pepe. But I think Kaspa is a much more serious project than either of these scammy projects. What is Kaspa? Kaspa, according to their own website, is a cryptocurrency that implements a protocol called GhostDAG. This is a generalization of Nakamoto consensus, and according to this website, unlike blockchains, a block DAG orders all blocks in parallel within consensus, which permits for extremely high block rates, virtually instant transactions, and scalability at no cost to security. This is based on a paper by the founder of Kaspa, named Yonatan Sopolinsky, and a couple other names here, which will come up later in this video. So I'll link to this if you want to read about it. And I would say that GhostDAG does appear to me to be a real innovation in this space. One of the talking points for Kaspa always is that it solves the trilemma faced by traditional cryptocurrencies. This is the blockchain trilemma, which I think Vitalik Buterin was actually the first to write about this. But this is the idea that there are various trade-offs, and if you want security or scalability or decentralization, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to give up on one of those. Has Kaspa actually solved this trilemma? From my cursory reading of their literature, it looks to me that the end state of Kaspa, if it were to be globally successful, is just a few people, or very few people, running massive archival nodes, thus threatening decentralization. But for the purposes of this video, I want to be really fair. I'm going to take the Kaspa community at their word and assume that Kaspa's GhostDAG is as amazing as they say it is, and that it has indeed solved the blockchain trilemma.
So one point about archival nodes. Archival nodes versus normal nodes. Archival nodes store the entire transaction history of the block DAG, whereas normal nodes only store the past 3 days or so of transaction history. However, normal nodes store the entire current updated UTXO set. And so this is very important to understand. Archival nodes are not needed for the functioning of the network. As a user of the network and a user of the money, I do not particularly care what the transaction history is of the man I am trying to buy a coffee from, and he does not particularly care what my transaction history is or who I have bought a coffee from in the past. All we care about, and all he cares about, is that I have enough funds, Kaspa, in my wallet in order to pay him for the coffee. And that information is stored in every single normal node. So the archival nodes are not essential for the running of the network at all. And you could actually turn off every single archival node and people would still be able to transact and exchange value with each other without any issues. And so this is quite an important point to understand, that in order for you to have a successful ledger and a functioning form of money, you do not need to know the entire transaction history. All you need is the UTXO sets and the wallet balances of the people you are trying to transact with. And so while, yes, not many people would be able to run archival nodes are not needed at all. And I would actually advocate for the removal of all archival nodes, because if archival nodes are removed, then transaction history is also removed. And that in fact increases the amount of privacy of the network. However, that's unlikely to happen. But so for the purposes of this video going forward, we will also be taking the same stance as Matt and assuming that Kaspa has solved the trilemma, and that is because it has.
Which is very exciting if true. The good things about Kaspa that distinguishes it from your common shitcoin, your common VC issued shitcoin with its pre-mine, etc. Kaspa does not have a pre-mine or any initial token allocation to anyone. Unlike Ethereum and Cardano and other trashy protocols, Kaspa runs on proof of work, which is really nice to see. And Kaspa also has a fixed maximum supply, just like Bitcoin. Though one might question whether its forward monetary policy, its future max supply, is as credible as Bitcoin's. Does the Kaspa community take this hard cap extremely seriously? Or could they be persuaded by Kaspa devs to increase the supply, the maximum supply at some point, if there's not enough revenue coming in from transaction fees? I do know that Bitcoiners are insane fanatics about not increasing the max supply and have been for 15 years. Kaspa has been around for
I can tell you absolutely categorically that the Kaspa community is as committed to that hard cap as the Bitcoin community is. The only reason I hold and use Kaspa is because it has that hard cap, and I know exactly what percentage of the network I own and will own into the future. If that hard cap is ever threatened or attempted to be changed, then I am almost certain that there would be a hard fork keeping the supply cap, but if that hard cap is ever successfully changed, then I certainly will no longer be holding or using Kaspa. So I can tell you pretty categorically that we are as committed to that hard cap as Bitcoiners are.
Only about 3 years, so maybe too early to tell. Though incentives would suggest that Kaspa holders would not want to dilute themselves in their own holdings by increasing the supply. If you're finding this video interesting so far, I just ask you to help to support the channel. Click that subscribe button and become a subscriber if you haven't already. Leave a like, leave a comment, question, suggestion for a future video. I think this video is going to prove to be extremely controversial, so you can leave a comment about that. Though please do be respectful to all sides involved, and also share this video with a friend or a family member. So Kaspa's max supply is 28.7 billion coins, and this is one reason it looks so cheap, because there's so many coins, whereas Bitcoin's max supply is just 21 million. So Bitcoin ends up on a per unit basis looking more expensive. Now, some bad things about Kaspa we're going to turn to now. One bad thing about Kaspa is that it has a living founder who tweets. This is Yonatan Sopolinsky. I just decided to check out his Twitter, and the first thing I see at the top is this: vengeance is justice. The only verdict is vengeance. A vendetta held as a votive, not in vain. And then there's a link to a YouTube video. This is actually a pretty funny quote. It's from one of my favorite movies, which is V for Vendetta, which I encourage everyone to see if they haven't seen it already. If we take a look at the date of this tweet, it's October 7th, 2023, which happens to be the same date that Israel invaded the Gaza Strip. And then Yonatan links to a YouTube video as part of this tweet. And though I enjoyed the V for Vendetta film, this is going to be a little more controversial. This is Ayn Rand on Israel in the Middle East, and this is what she says at the beginning of the video.
But if you mean whose side should one be on, Israel or the Arabs, I would certainly say Israel, because...
So this is what's really behind this tweet. It is a V for Vendetta quote, but it's obviously talking about current events. And if I were a Palestinian or a Muslim from any country, and I'm actually not either of these things, is this really what I would want to see if I were a Palestinian, Muslim, or a Muslim from any country? Is this really what I want to see tweeted out by the founder of the world's supposed next global reserve currency? The whole Kaspa dev team appears to be mostly Israelis as well. If we take a look at Kaspa.org, we have Yonatan at the top here, and then all these guys appear to be either Israelis or have studied at some point at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Now, decentralization is important at many different levels when it comes to cryptocurrencies, and having a living founder and devs who are mostly Israelis is not exactly what you want to see when it comes to decentralization, especially when they're constantly tweeting about Gaza. You have to ask yourself, is Kaspa anti-Muslim money? I think it's a good question. I cannot definitively say that it is not, unfortunately. Obviously, the math, ghost tag, the cryptography is neutral, and the network is neutral, at least at this point. But the problem is that the founder and devs who determined Kaspa's roadmap have taken to having a very public stance on the Israel-Palestine conflict. And in fairness to them, if I lived in the area, this is something I would be obsessed with as well, because...
So I want to make this very clear. I'm coming at this from a monetary stance. I'm coming at this from basically an amoral stance, because money fundamentally is amoral. Money does not particularly care about your viewpoint or what political affiliation that you hold. Money fundamentally is a technology, and it is a technology that allows us to do three things. It allows us to store value, it allows us to exchange value, and it also allows us to have a unit of account. And the best form of money doesn't particularly care about anyone's political viewpoint or affiliation. The best form of money fulfills those properties regardless of what viewpoint you have. And I want to do a little thought experiment with you now. And for this example, I am going to use the Raystones, which most Bitcoiners know. So as most of you know, the people of the island of Yap who used the Raystones and were then diluted by the Europeans who came along with advanced mining technology. I want you to think about them. If they had stood there and refused to accept gold as the superior form of money and continued to use the Raystones because of the political or religious affiliations of the Europeans who came to their shores and who were able to dilute and debase their ledger, it doesn't matter what affiliation those people of Yap had or what the affiliation of those Europeans had. Fundamentally, when the superior technology of gold was introduced to the inferior monetary technology of the Raystones, the only option that those people of Yap had, if they wanted to keep their wealth and to escape the debasement that was coming, was to get off the inferior monetary technology and get onto the superior monetary technology, which was gold at the time. If they want to, they can have a moral or religious stance or viewpoint, but that's not going to help them protect their wealth or escape the debasement that came. So money fundamentally is amoral. It does not matter what stance that the devs have or what stance anyone else has. Fundamentally, when a superior monetary technology meets an inferior monetary technology, your only option, regardless of morals or religion or political affiliation, is to adopt the superior monetary technology. And so my stance is that these devs having this stance and political affiliation, and other people having a different stance and a different political affiliation, it does not affect the technology, and it does not affect the fact that Kaspa is the trilemma solver and is the superior form of money. And just as those people who stayed on the Raystones or cowrie shells or agribeads, if they do not adopt and adapt to the superior form of money, then they will lose out monetarily, regardless of what their political affiliation is.
the conflict would be very close to my doorstep. The problem, though, is when you have a founder and devs who determine Kaspa's roadmap, and they've taken this very public stance, they also have an outsized influence on the community, which still puts a lot of trust in them. You'll see this a lot in tweets, people talking about the Kaspa devs. This is Entropia saying, I've heard devs say that they will not, and miners will be paid by smart contract fees. My faith is in Yonatan's resume. This is what you come back to again and again. Some people even claim that Yonatan is Satoshi Nakamoto, which he clearly is not. But let's leave aside your own political or religious views on the Israel-Palestine tragedy for a moment. Even assuming that Yonatan and his devs have zero influence over future Kaspa forks, which it would be naive to assume since Yonatan has a bully pulpit that he could choose to start using at any time. Even assuming that they have zero influence over future Kaspa forks, this is a problem because this is something that could always happen. He could, or the devs could use their bully pulpits for this. This is one big problem with having a living founder. If Satoshi were live on social media today, it would probably be a similar disaster.
So Yonatan, of course, has a lot of respect and a lot of weight within the Kaspa community, but fundamentally, Kaspa is a completely decentralized project, and the nodes of Kaspa run the project more so than Yonatan does or any of the other developers do. And so right now, while Yonatan's incentives align with my incentives and all the other holders of the network, and our incentives align, which they do currently at the minute, because all of us want to be part of the superior monetary technology and the best cryptocurrency out there, while those incentives align, we trust Yonatan fully. But if Yonatan or any of the other devs ever get a perverse incentive and they try to gain some sort of advantage by using the ledger, and by gaining that advantage, they would put all other users of the ledger at a disadvantage, then the respect that he has will no longer carry any weight, because fundamentally people are greedy and people act in their own self-interest. And so if the interests of Yonatan or any of the other devs ever stop aligning with mine or any other users of the network, then he will no longer be able to influence the network. And that fundamentally is the nature of a decentralized project, that no one person controls it. And the entire network essentially is the sum of all of the incentives of every participant of that network.
Satoshi had the foresight and the humility to leave the project and never be heard from again, and unfortunately Yonatan did not. This is one key difference between Bitcoin's Immaculate Conception versus Kaspa, which is trying to make a baby in front of everyone in public. And the really sad thing here is that Yonatan himself understands this principle, but has been unable to follow in Satoshi's superhuman path. Here's a tweet from Yonatan quoting, fish tuna, and Yonatan saying the operation was successful, but the doctor died. Nailed it. If the patient is a money system, the doctor must vanish as Satoshi vanished, because money is a medium rather than a product. It must emerge rather than be purposed. This is one problem with having a living and active founder with politics. In the case of Bitcoin, the doctor, which was Satoshi, the doctor definitely vanished. In the case of Kaspa, the doctor is unfortunately still around and tweeting pro-Israel videos. And I want to be really clear here about the point that I'm making, because I know that my enemies will try to use this against me to try to get me deplatformed for supposed anti-Semitism. So I'll say this very clearly here. This is not about being for or against Israelis or Palestinians or Jews or Muslims or even Christians. It's important to remember that 3% of the Palestinians are indeed Christians. This is about, the point I'm making here, it's about the necessary preconditions for creating neutral money that can be embraced and used by 8 billion human beings from every country, every state, every territory in the world, including people who are Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, deists, atheists, agnostics, whatever. And if you're core dev...
So the argument I'm going to make here is that the Immaculate Conception, while it is sort of a nice story for Bitcoin, fundamentally, it basically does not matter. And this again goes back to the decentralized nature of the network. Yes, Yonatan invented Kaspa and he coded Kaspa, but he, as an individual, does not have any more control over the network than any other members of the network do. Fundamentally, the nodes control the network. And this idea that a cryptocurrency project has to have an anonymous founder is fundamentally flawed. It doesn't come from anywhere. It's a nice idea, but basically, if the technology is there and the technology is superior, it fundamentally does not matter as long as two properties are fulfilled. The technology is superior and the technology is adequately decentralized that that founder does not have any more control over the network than anybody else. Before any changes are made to the Kaspa network, that has to be agreed by a consensus majority of the nodes. And if it is not agreed, then the only option is to hard fork, just as it has been done in Bitcoin.
The team is all Israelis. That's great if you're just writing software, but it's not so great if you're trying to create new neutral money for the world. And it's even worse if your founder is actively tweeting and linking to pro-Israel videos. All I can say here is thank God that Satoshi disappeared when he did and never came back, whether it was something he chose to do or whether it was by accident. This was a great blessing. And thank God that he disappeared, because I personally do not like sashimi.
So my question to you is, why does it matter if the inventor of a technology is anonymous or not? Is the inventor of the atomic bomb anonymous? No, they are not anonymous, but the atomic bomb still functions as a technology and has huge implications for the world stage and world politics. And money fundamentally is just a technology. So as long as it is decentralized and no one person has control of the network, then it does not matter if the creator is anonymous or not. And that technology will still function in the world as it is intended to function, assuming it is a superior monetary technology.
In the case of Bitcoin, the doctor definitely vanished, but it's much more than that. And I want to expand on what Yonatan was saying there. It's much more than the doctor just disappearing. Bitcoin really was nothing more than a curiosity in its early years. It was a collectible for nerds that had zero monetary value. Then something amazing happened. Bitcoin grew slowly and organically under the radar. Bitcoin experienced a long and slow and organic distribution creation of coins, and then Bitcoin experienced spontaneous monetization. It started off having no monetary value. Bitcoin didn't have a Harvard or Hebrew University PhD doing Medium posts and telling everyone that he made Kaspa to get rich. This is a Medium post by Yonatan.
So this idea that Bitcoin did not have a monetization initially, Bitcoin has always been fundamentally monetized. It might not have had a dollar value attached to it, but because energy has always been needed to create Bitcoin in the world, then the cost of that energy inherently makes Bitcoin monetized. And because those early Bitcoins required energy and money to produce and bring into the world, even if they were not initially trading for a dollar value, does not mean they were not monetized. In fact, because Bitcoin has zero utility value at all, inherently every ounce of value within Bitcoin is monetary value. And as soon as Bitcoin had even 1 cent of market cap, it had a monetary value attached to it. Bitcoin is 100% monetary value, as is Kaspa.
And we talked about why he made Kaspa, and the second reason was to make myself rich, which I think is a little bit embarrassing to say, especially when you compare it to Satoshi's humility and the fact that Satoshi has never moved his coins. Now,
Again, in terms of technology, this does not really matter. Yonatan, like the rest of us, is human, and he has his own incentives. Of course, Yonatan wants to become rich and wealthy, and the point is that he didn't do this by pre-allocating himself 50% of the supply. He has only been able to access Kaspa coins the same way that every single other person has been able to, by either mining them or buying them on the free market. So the only advantage that he has had is that he was basically the first adopter of this project. But that is not fundamentally inherently a bad thing. He has not had any asymmetric advantage by giving himself coins for free. So he has participated in the network fairly in the same way that every single other participant of the network has participated. And so I would argue that he has gained his wealth completely fairly and completely legitimately, unlike a proof of stake coin where a huge allocation is given to VCs or insiders.
A lot of people fail to understand, and I think the Kaspa community fails to understand this as well, is that creating a new money involves multiple factors beyond cool new tech or cool new cryptography or cool new math. GhostDAG certainly appears to me at least to be a genuine innovation. And maybe there are aspects of it that could work well within the Bitcoin ecosystem, maybe as part of a layer 2, but then you wouldn't need the Kaspa token at all. Creating a new money involves much more than cool new tech or cryptography. It involves a fair community launch without a pre-mine. That's table stakes, and I think Kaspa does that well, unlike almost every other crypto in the world besides Bitcoin. But you also need a slow, organic process of growth in which the coins are globally distributed and spontaneously monetized. And Kaspa rushes this, unfortunately, because its founder and its devs are only human and they're high time preference like the rest of us. So Kaspa launched, it was in November of 2021, and 95% of all the coins will have been mined by July 2026. So this is a much faster issuance schedule than Bitcoin had. Here's the thing, you can only create true digital scarcity.
So to compare Bitcoin to Kaspa in terms of emission schedule is not quite correct, because Bitcoin was coming from zero. There were 0 participants of the cryptocurrency space at that time. Well, arguably 1, and that was Satoshi. But so inherently, of course, initially Bitcoin grew a lot slower than Kaspa did. I actually did a video about this. On day 966 of Bitcoin's inception and its launch, it was at a 57 million market cap. Whereas Kaspa, at the same date after its launch, 966 days after its launch, is at a 4.4 billion market cap. So at the same time frame that Bitcoin and Kaspa were launched, Kaspa is nearly 100 times bigger than Bitcoin is. So it would not have been appropriate to have the exact same emission schedule, because they are coming to the market at different stages in the overall adoption of cryptocurrency. And what this fast emission schedule has done is it has allowed small miners using CPU and GPU mining to fairly mine the network. And only now that larger, more efficient ASIC miners are coming in, they are having to compete over a smaller amount of coins. Over essentially 25% of the network was still to be issued at the time ASICs came around. So just as in the early days of Bitcoin, and for a long time, it was only CPU and then GPU miners, and they were able to mine a significant percentage of the Bitcoin network before ASICs came in. Essentially, the same emission schedule came with Kaspa, but because these ASICs were already around and introduced much faster, about 1.5 years after the initial launch of Kaspa, if Kaspa had still only issued around 20% of its total issuance, then that means that the ASIC miners, which normal people can't compete with, would be then able to harvest around 80% of the entire supply. Whereas because most of the supply has already come out, smaller, more decentralized miners were able to get a share of the Kaspa network.
Once, and Satoshi did just that with Bitcoin. Any subsequent attempts to do this, any subsequent creations, will always be copies, near copies, copycats, derivatives, variations to go around telling everyone online and on Twitter that they're better than Bitcoin for whatever reason. Bitcoin is always the standard for some reason that everyone compares everything to. Now, if Satoshi had known about block DAG at the time, maybe he would have used it as the basis for Bitcoin, but he didn't know about it, and he did not use it as the basis for.
You cannot create another Bitcoin. You can recreate digital scarcity, but you cannot recreate another Bitcoin. If another chain that had the exact same tech as Bitcoin, or very similar tech with only marginal improvements came out, such as Bitcoin Cash or Litecoin, as we have seen, they would not be able to compete with the network effect that Bitcoin has, and therefore Bitcoin being first had a huge advantage. And the fact that Metcalfe's law and the law of networks has given Bitcoin this huge advantage, but that does not apply if a vastly superior technology comes along. And because Kaspa fundamentally is a vastly superior technology to Bitcoin, it is able to threaten that network effect that Bitcoin has in a way that both Litecoin or Bitcoin Cash were not able to do.
For Bitcoin. And by the time that Kaspa came on the scene in late 2021, Bitcoin was already a globally distributed asset with powerful network effects and a market cap above 1 trillion. That is a powerful first mover advantage that I don't believe that Kaspa can overcome. Bitcoin already has a global brand and Kaspa does not. Bitcoin is already being plugged into the financial system everywhere from savings, retirement accounts, corporate treasuries, ETFs, futures, options, etc. Bitcoin has so many companies in the ecosystem. They make hardware wallets, it has exchanges, it has retirement products, it has everything you can imagine. And by contrast, Kaspa is a very, very new, very niche.
So this is just not a particularly good argument, because you could have made this same argument against Bitcoin in 2011, 2012, or 2013, and look where we are now. So fundamentally, what you're talking about here is acceptability as a property of money. And what you are arguing is that a good money is highly acceptable and highly distributed around the world. But acceptability is not a property of money. Acceptability is a result of having a good money. Again, going back to those raystones, gold was not acceptable at all on the island of Yap when the Europeans initially came. But does that mean that gold was an inferior money at that time? No, it does not. And acceptability will come to any network or any monetary technology that is superior to other technologies. So basically, acceptability is an output of being a good money, not an input of being a good money.
Product. It's only been around since 2021. Kaspa is also not battle tested like Bitcoin. Kaspa hasn't even grown large enough yet to warrant attention from nation state attackers like Bitcoin has. Will Kaspa be able to survive when it's attacked? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. The question is, do you feel lucky? I certainly wouldn't sleep well if I stored my savings in Kaspa rather than Bitcoin.
That is actually a fair point. Kaspa has not been battle tested as much as Bitcoin has. But again, you could have made this same argument against Bitcoin in 2011 or 2012. It had not been particularly battle tested at that point. And that fundamentally is where the reward of the future asset appreciation comes from. If Kaspa was battle tested and had already proved itself on the market, then it would be a much higher market cap and a much higher price. And so by holding it now and buying it now before it has been battle tested and trusting the technology and trusting the literature, that is where the future rewards come from.
Bitcoin. Now, the Kaspa community seems always quick to offer olive branches to Bitcoiners, and this is a gesture that I do appreciate and assure us that they're not here trying to usurp Bitcoin's place with their new coin. Common phrases you'll see in my discussion with them and with other people. I don't see Kaspa as a competitor to Bitcoin. They'll also say that Kaspa is silver to Bitcoin's gold, and I would say that the latter phrase is especially unfortunate. Kaspa is called Kaspa because Kaspa means silver in Aramaic, and so technically Kaspa is being marketed as silver to Bitcoin's gold based on its very name. Unfortunately, that's the same silly marketing slogan that Litecoin has been trying to use for years, and this is what silver to Bitcoin's gold has looked like for Litecoin. So I'm not sure why you'd want to take this similar tack and label Kaspa as silver, because Litecoin shows you that silver to gold doesn't do very well when it comes up to crypto. And since gold itself, physical gold, historically ended up demonetizing silver, this metaphor also shows ignorance of economic history. The only reason people use physical silver on a bimetallic standard was because gold is very dense and very expensive and difficult to subdivide, so silver functioned as quote-unquote small change to gold's larger denominations. It's obviously not a problem for software money like Bitcoin or cryptocurrency in general where you can subdivide Bitcoin into sats and then those sats into smaller denominations if necessary.
So I completely agree. The only reason that silver was able to exist is because it had a higher score on the divisibility front than gold did. And when the divisibility of gold was solved by banking and central banking, all of the monetary value was lost from silver and it went down purely to its base asset value or its base utility value. So the only reason that silver and gold were able to coexist was because fundamentally they were both inferior forms of money, or both were not the perfect form of money. And they left gaps in the money markets for other assets to fill, and that allowed them to coexist.
And saying that this is going to be a problem implies a massive valuation for Bitcoin, because dollar sat parity is the same thing as saying that one Bitcoin is valued at $100 million. So this is not a problem. This divisibility and scalability is not a problem for next week. So you don't really need silver to Bitcoin's gold, because Bitcoin itself is divisible. Then you'll see.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Bitcoin is infinitely divisible, and even if we ever do reach dollar sat parity, a fork to increase the divisibility of Bitcoin would not be an issue at all. So I completely agree with you on that point.
Comments like this from Dominic Oliver. C. Well, I don't see it as a competitor to Bitcoin. It can never get so valuable as Bitcoin as it has a much larger max supply. Kaspa is more like a coin that could be used for payments in the future instead of fiat money. They say it is fast and a big number of transactions per second. Bitcoin, on the other hand, is more like digital gold or diamond, as it is high value and scarce. You wouldn't want to use it for payments in restaurant shops, etc. I always love to hear your honest opinion, so please tell me if I'm very wrong here. And I think he is wrong. I think it's a big mistake to assume that there can be two different kinds of money, and one's going to be used for store value, and another's going to be used for medium of exchange. These two functions of money are inextricably tied together, and this will converge to using one money only. And you can certainly use Bitcoin over Lightning for payments, for smaller payments in restaurants and shops, etc. As for this peaceful coexistence,
I agree. I believe that money fundamentally will be a winner takes all market. But so first of all, we need to address your point of using Lightning in shops, because Lightning is a layer 2, and a layer 2 fundamentally is always a custodial solution. So in exactly the same way that banking and central banking were a custodial solution to the portability issue of gold, Lightning and layer 2s are also a solution to the portability issue that Bitcoin has. And the thing is, as soon as you introduce this third party in the peer-to-peer exchange, the incentives become perverse. So in the exact same way that banking and central banking perverted the incentives of holding gold, what banks would do, I'm sure you know this, but they would increase the amount of claims on that gold, and therefore were able to offer their services for much cheaper, or even pay people to deposit gold within their bank. And because they were able to do this and attract more customers that way, all other banks were incentivized to also do this and to attract more customers and fight for those customers. So these layer 2s, which fundamentally are businesses and will have to fight for customers, will have to find ways to lower their fees, the fees that they have to pay on the base layer. And one way that they are going to do that, and they are incentivized to do that, is to create more claims on the Bitcoin than actually exists, in the trust that not everybody will want to redeem it at the same time. And so in the exact same way that banking was used to solve the portability issue that gold has, layer 2s are being used to solve the portability issue that Bitcoin has. And so you have to ask yourself, what are the perverse incentives that are going to arise from these layer 2s?
Between different forms of money, people saying within the Kaspa community or the Bitcoin community or any other community saying, I don't really see XYZ or Kaspa as a competitor to Bitcoin. This is an absurd statement to make. All money competes with all other money. Money is war. That's what it is. It's not cooperation. Strong money vanquishes weak money, as has been happening with the US dollar wiping out the...
Yeah, I completely 100% agree with you. Money is competition. Basically, money is war. And the form of money that is adopted is going to be the form of money that gives the greatest number of people the greatest advantage to adopt. And so you have to ask yourself, is Bitcoin the monetary asset that gives the greatest number of people the greatest advantage to adopt? Bearing in mind that the vast majority of people are too poor to be able to use the Bitcoin base layer, and therefore will have to use layer 2s. And are there any way that those layer 2s will be able to take advantage of those people who are forced to use the layer 2s? For example, by loaning out their Bitcoin and creating more claims on the Bitcoin that actually exists, and enabling them to lower their fees to their customers, attracting more customers, and therefore essentially creating a race to the bottom of all layer 2s who want to retain and attract customers. They will be forced to loan out more Bitcoin than actually exists, in the exact same way that happened with gold. Therefore, it is not in the interest of those who are too poor to adopt Bitcoin to use the layer 2s. It is in fact in their interest to look for another money that gives them the biggest advantage to use and to adopt. And currently, the only competitor for that spot is Kaspa.
The Turkish lira, wiping out the Lebanese pound, and lately even wiping out the Japanese yen. Do you happen to carry US dollars and euros and yen in your wallet and your bank accounts? Unless you're a multinational corporation, you probably don't, because of course it's quite inconvenient. And this is why money is a winner-take-all game. Money is the most saleable commodity, the most saleable asset. And so it would make sense that you would want something that is accepted everywhere. You don't want multiple forms of money. This is why money always tries to converge to one. Even today, the world is still mostly on US dollar standard. Almost all the central banks hold US dollar denominated US treasuries as a reserve asset. And most money in the world today is pegged either informally or formally to the US dollar, and is thus subject to Federal Reserve monetary policy. When the Fed sneezes, the whole world catches cold, and the Fed's knock-on cross-currency effects. So money converges to one. We'd actually already have one global money if it weren't for nation states putting up gates and sanctions, which is admittedly a logical response to other governments issuing their own competing fiat monies. But for Bitcoin is much more difficult for nation states to try to stop with gates and sanctions. And there's also this nation state accumulation game theory behind it, since no country can turn it off or freeze it, which makes it a very nice thing to accumulate, even if your enemies don't like you accumulating it. So the US can accumulate it, and China and Russia can do nothing about it, and vice versa, which is quite different for fiat currencies. If Russia starts to accumulate US dollars, the US, the Fed, or the US Treasury can turn it off, unlike Bitcoin. So the fact that it's much more difficult for nation states to stop Bitcoin, and the fact that there's going to be this competition for it, and the fact that it's neutral money that can't be turned off by your enemies, all of this suggests that Bitcoin possesses all the necessary properties that it needs to become the world's next global reserve reserve currency and global reserve asset being used as a store of value, as a medium of exchange, and as a unit of account. So if you're saying that Kaspa is not a competitor to Bitcoin, we just want to peacefully coexist with you guys, then you don't understand anything about economic history or about how monetary competition works. Issuers of fiat put a gun, it's self-funded by the fiat money printers, to our heads and force us to use their money. And that's why there's still different forms of money in the world and not just one, though there's really only one global monetary reserve asset, which used to be gold and now is US Treasuries, and some people have diversified back into gold. Some will diversify into Bitcoin. But fiat puts a gun to your head and forces you to use it. Unless Kaspa is going to put a gun to your head, to our heads as well, then it's just going to have to compete in the free market against Bitcoin, just like fiat, just like other cryptocurrencies. And I personally have no doubt that Kaspa will lose this competition thanks to its late arrival on the scene at a time when Bitcoin was already $1 trillion asset with global.
So I completely agree. Obviously, Kaspa does not have the same incentives that fiat does. The only reason people use fiat is essentially proof of force, as opposed to the proof of work that Bitcoin or Kaspa have. And so via that proof of force, governments are able to prop up the value of their essentially worthless currency and force us to use it under the threat of violence. But as the free market incentives imply, for the same reason that Bitcoin has been adopted over fiat, because Bitcoin fundamentally gives you a huge advantage to use over fiat or gold, Kaspa gives you an advantage to use over Bitcoin, because there is no need for layer 2s on Kaspa, because it is scalable enough for everybody to use the base layer, and therefore no middlemen ever have to be involved if you do not want them to be involved. Whereas for Bitcoin, if you wish to use Bitcoin and are too poor to use the Bitcoin base layer, then you will have to use layer 2s and custodial solutions and essentially middlemen. Bitcoin is fundamentally no longer a peer-to-peer electronic cash as it was intended to be, but Kaspa is. And so because using Bitcoin puts you at a disadvantage, and having to use these layer 2s puts you at a disadvantage, for the same reason that people have swapped from fiat to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin gives an advantage over using fiat, people will swap to Kaspa over Bitcoin, because Kaspa gives you an advantage over Bitcoin, especially if you are too poor to use the base layer.
Network effects. This is the pool, this is the ocean that Bitcoin is playing in right now. It's playing here with Saudi Aramco, the biggest oil company in the world, is playing here with big tech, it's playing here with silver and gold. It's one of the top 10 assets in the world, and it's extremely liquid and accessible as well. Whereas Kaspa is still playing in the shallow end, or a little blow up swimming pool, has a market cap less than 5 billion currently, even though it's gone up a lot this year. It's still absolutely tiny. It's playing a completely different game. It's not on the global stage yet, like Bitcoin is. And the question,
I completely agree. Kaspa is not on the global stage yet, and it is still very early in its adoption phase. It is only 2 years old. You know, how big was Bitcoin when it was 2 years old? And so again, this is sort of an appeal to authority. It's saying that because Bitcoin is bigger, therefore it's better and it will survive. You could have made the same argument 10 years ago from gold to Bitcoin. Gold fundamentally was bigger and it was competing on the global stage, but would you have rather owned gold or Bitcoin 10 years ago? So again, this is just not an argument, and Kaspa is fundamentally still in a very early phase of adoption. But just as that adoption came with Bitcoin, due to it being superior to everything else around it at that time, that adoption will come for Kaspa due to it being the superior monetary technology at this time.
arises, could Bitcoin eventually be defeated by Kaspa, just like Bitcoin has been defeating fiat for the past 15 years? I think the answer to this is no as well. It's a very different kind of competition because Bitcoin is scarce, sound money, whereas what it's fighting against, fiat money, is absolute garbage, and it's not scarce at all. So it's very easy for scarce, sound money to defeat garbage. Kaspa is a much bigger fight on its hands than this. Kaspa will have to try to defeat a battle-hardened warrior that has a 12-year lead over Kaspa, and that battle-hardened warrior is the best money that the world has ever seen. So I just say, good luck with that. The Kaspa.
So again, Bitcoin was the best money from 2009 to 2021. However, Bitcoin has that issue of portability, and the only way that you can solve that issue of portability of Bitcoin is to use layer 2s and to use middlemen. Essentially, in the exact same way the portability issue of gold was solved with banks and central banking. And so you have to ask yourself, what are the incentives of these layer 2s and these middlemen, and what results will play out in the world as a result of having to use these layer 2s? In the exact same mechanism that the results of people having to use banks and central banks in order to speed up and make cheaper the transactions of gold played out.
Army is still small and very niche. The Bitcoin army is large and global. Bitcoin is front and center in the US presidential race. Bitcoin is front and center on Wall Street today. Bitcoin is front and center in geopolitics today. Bitcoin is $1 trillion asset waging war on the global stage, while Kaspa is still just a little boy sitting at home playing with his toy soldiers and pretending that one day he will grow up to be Napoleon, and he's pretending he's going to know what he's going to do in the heat of battle when he's being shot at and he's covered with blood. Bitcoin is already in the heat of that battle, whereas Kaspa is not even started that battle. Kaspa is still just a little boy sitting at home playing.
Again, this is just not a particularly good argument. You could have made the same argument about Bitcoin in 2011, and look where we are now. So appealing to authority is not a good argument. Instead, appeal to the technology and what advantages that technology will bring people to adopt and to use. Just as people were incentivized to use Bitcoin because Bitcoin gives you an advantage over fiat, people are incentivized to use Kaspa because Kaspa gives you an advantage over Bitcoin and allows people to transact peer-to-peer without any middlemen.
With his toy soldiers. The cryptography is cool, but this is not something that is ever going to be able to catch up with Bitcoin. Bitcoin Army is a crazy, obsessed, smart bunch of fanatics who've been training together for years and whose numbers far exceed the tiny Kaspa community. And Bitcoin itself is a battle-hardened protocol that has already been attacked by nation states and has only gotten stronger in the process. So if you choose to store your savings in Kaspa or any other asset than Bitcoin, you will gradually get poorer over time relative to Bitcoiners. You can try to trade in and out of Kaspa. You can try to jump from the fastest horse to the next fastest horse. I don't think you can do that successfully over time, and on a post-tax basis, that will exceed Bitcoin's returns. I'm very, very skeptical that anyone can do this, and I think if you try to do it, you're going to end up very disappointed, like most traders do. If you store your savings in Kaspa over the long term, you will shrink into obscurity. Every single money that's tried to dethrone King Bitcoin has failed. So Kaspa may indeed outperform Bitcoin over certain periods of time. Every shitcoin, even every penny stock, does over certain periods of time. But Kaspa is guaranteed to trend to zero against Bitcoin, like every asset in the world will.
Every single money that has tried to dethrone Bitcoin up until now has failed, but that does not mean Bitcoin is completely impervious. If a superior form of money comes along, just as throughout history, when a superior monetary technology meets an inferior monetary technology, that inferior monetary technology is at serious threat from the superior monetary technology, and those who adopt the superior monetary technology are able to gain an advantage over those who use the inferior monetary technology. And just as this has played out throughout history, this will also play out through the future. And the only correct option is to get yourself off the inferior monetary technology and get yourself onto the superior monetary technology and adopt the best form of money that is available to you at that time.
Over time. So choose your money wisely. Money, as we said, is a winner-take-all game, and the winner has been for the last 15 years and will continue to be. That #1 spot on CoinMarketCap has always been Bitcoin. No one has ever come close, and groups like Ethereum that have tried have miserably failed. So I encourage everyone to get on the winning team before it's too late. So if you've ridden it from penny to 19 or 20 cents or wherever it's trading today, congratulations on that. You really should take your profits and move them into Bitcoin. You've been very
All projects previously have failed, but no project previously has been able to solve the trilemma. So if by your argument, and we are assuming that Kaspa has solved the trilemma, then Kaspa has a serious advantage over all of these other coins that have attempted this in the past.
lucky. Going forward, you might not be as lucky. It's important just to hodl Bitcoin and don't mess this up because you have shiny new object syndrome. There are always going to be new cryptos that try to claim our attention with promises of supplementing or complementing or displacing Bitcoin. And I encourage all of you to ignore them and just focus on staying humble and stacking sats. Don't try to outtrade this market. Don't try to trade in and out of other things to get more Bitcoin. Lead a humble and honest life. Provide goods and services to the world for fiat or Bitcoin and use that to buy Bitcoin. Don't try to trade your way to a bigger stack. That will not work for most people, for 99.9% of people. If you enjoyed this video, I encourage
Fundamentally, what is the game here? The game here is to create the best form of money that humans have available to them and the best form of money that we have ever seen. And as Kaspa has solved the trilemma and it has maintained those core traits of proof of work and decentralization and Nakamoto consensus security, but it maintains these and is also able to scale to Visa level transactions, Kaspa represents the best form of money that humans have available to us. And just as throughout history, the inferior forms of money have been overtaken by the superior forms of money, I believe that is what is going to happen with Kaspa and Bitcoin. And the game we are in fundamentally is to adopt the superior monetary technology and adopt the technology that gives the greatest number of people the greatest advantage to hold. You know, money fundamentally is a network of individuals all acting in their own self-interest. And if their self-interest is not to use Bitcoin because of the perverse incentives of the layer 2s, then their self-interest is to find another coin that does give them the greatest advantage to hold. And currently that coin is Kaspa. So Matt, as an ex-Bitcoin maxi, I say to you, please just buy $1 worth of Kaspa. There has never been a project in the past that has been able to seriously threaten Bitcoin. And there has never been a project that has been able to maintain decentralization and maintain Bitcoin level security while being scalable. They have all, in one way or another, consist on decentralization or security. Kaspa, if you believe it has solved the trilemma, is the first project that has been able to do that, and therefore represents the first ever real threat to Bitcoin market dominance. And so I am assuming that you hold a significant amount of your net worth in Bitcoin right now. So as a responsible investor, I would implore you to get just a little bit of Kaspa. You know, obviously don't immediately just swap everything, but just in case Kaspa truly is the superior form of money. And just like in the past, when a superior money met an inferior money, such as gold meeting the Raystones or agri beads, when a superior money is introduced into that system, there is nothing that can stop it. And so if that is a risk you do not want to take, then I would implore you to get just a little bit of Kaspa, just to de-risk and protect your downside in case it does catch on. So thank you very much, you guys, for watching. And Matt, I highly recommend that you get just a little bit of Kaspa just in case it does catch on and just in case it does take that money market share from Bitcoin, as it is the superior form of money. But regardless, thank you very much guys for watching, and until next time, cheers.